Hello everyone, it's Silvia. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about something that I have been feeling for a while, but I'm not entirely sure, and it's a question mark basically. And I wanted to try and ask the tarot community because I think that it's a phenomenon that is actually quite strong, that it's more and more visible, but it also feels like the tarot community is probably not, I think. Maybe we don't think that it's just as big as a phenomenon that we need to pay attention to it. We probably don't think that it's the harbinger of change. We probably don't think that it's something that will last. Because honestly, I've been collecting tarot decks and later on also oracle decks. I started an actual collection in 1988. So it's a long time. I've been collecting for a long time. I have been reading for longer than that. And I've seen a lot of things happening when it comes to marketing, especially. So when I talk about marketing, I obviously refer to big publishers. So we're talking Los Carabel, we're talking US Games, and then later on Hay House, and you know, all of the big ones. Obviously, we have a few more. And it feels like there's every 3-4 years there's a trend, and it shouldn't come as a surprise that there's a new trend in town. It's just that for me personally, when I look back at all of the trends, and just to give you a few examples, the collage decks, the animal-based decks, the botanical-based decks, the fandom decks, you know, with Insight editions. What else? You know, all of those, and now unfortunately the AI decks, of course. You know, all of those, let's say, couple of years in which you are literally bombarded with decks that either have the same themes, see, for example, mushroom decks a couple of years ago, or they pertain to a certain category of decks, like the fandom decks, the collage, etc. And as a tarot collector and a tarot reader, I pick and choose. For example, there was a time in which I just did not like collage decks. And then a friend of mine convinced me to buy the Voyager Tarot, and then I started liking them. There was a time in which I just could not read with animal decks, as in just animals on the cards and no people. I really needed people. There was a time in which I categorically refused to read with people without faces on the cards. That's still going. I really can't. It just freaks me out. So I have probably been, whether it was unconscious, subconscious, or conscious, I have probably been responding to these trends in my own way. And I never really felt that I was doing the wrong thing, simply because I always thought that as long as I was choosing the proper decks to do a reading with, and as long as I was enjoying the decks that I was buying, and as long as I, let's say, agreed with the author. So there's something else that we need to also come to terms with, is that tarot collectors, but especially tarot readers, we do not keep, unless it's a collectible item, we don't keep a tarot deck that we fundamentally disagree with. So I recently rehomed a deck simply because there were 90% of the cards with which I was just not resonating with. I was not believing in. I couldn't use it for reading. It's a mass market deck. It's very affordable. And so I really didn't feel any kind of need to keep that deck, because I was actually doing it a disservice by leaving it there on a shelf gathering dust. I rehomed it, and the person that acquired it sent me an email a couple of days ago saying they love it, they're absolutely happy with it, and they're using it. You know, when it's not a collectible item, you want the tarot deck to be used. That's the proper thing to do. So basically, I've been asked myself, when does a trend become so important that it actually gives us signs that it's going to stick around. And the trend in particular I want to talk about is within RWS decks, or rather RWS clones. We call it a clone when it is based on the RWS, the Rider-Waite-Smith system, but it doesn't show you the cards from the images, let's say, from the traditional RWS as they have been created by Pixie, Pamela Coleman Smith. So when it's an RWS-based deck that doesn't show you those images we are so familiar with, I think that as tarot collectors and readers, we have a rather cavalier attitude towards it, because we always think that the OG is the one and only. And then if there's an RWS clone, what we always do, we tend to look at the image and refer it back to the original from the RWS, right? At least that's what I do. I don't know, maybe no one else does it, but I do see comparisons side to side. I do see people referring to elements when they see them. If there's symbols that appear in both decks, then, people tend to point that out. So it's not just me. But lately, I've felt like I've acquired, specifically, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decks next to me here on a pile. And see, these 6 decks, it feels like they are completely independent, autonomous from the OG. They are based on an RWS system. I feel like reading them with the meaning of the RWS, but they have barely any symbol that is related to the original, and it still works. And so I'm just trying to ask myself, is this a new generation of decks, of RWS decks, and have we missed out on it? Is this the Gen Z of decks, or tarot decks in specific? Because when I teach tarot, I always use the RWS, and I don't even have it here on my pile of 5 or 6 decks. I don't have it. I always use it when I'm teaching tarot, because I believe that it's just easier for a student to learn the OG. And then whenever you use a deck that is not the OG, it's just easy to recognize the symbols, and it's easy to memorize. It's easy to just remind yourself that the 6 of Cups is about nostalgia of when you were a child and things were not so complicated, and receiving a flower was still back then speaking of innocence, for example. And then all the additional layers, just try and find some solace in reminding yourself of a simpler time when things were not so complicated, and so on and so forth. And so pointing to the symbols, I could talk for hours for each and every card, but then I remind myself that the reason why I could talk for hours is because I've always been using that deck when teaching and also when reading. What if it's time to move on? I mean, I'm not discarding the power of the OG RWS, because I believe that Pixie's work was so evocative, and you can tell the power of manifestation. There is a strong intention behind the images that we see in that deck. But my question is, because there's so many new decks that are just as powerful, and really, when I'm doing the unboxing, you probably can guess a couple of decks that are here on the pile on my left. Because when I do the unboxing, I just cannot hide it. These decks have really shocked me. They have really slapped me across the face, and they forced me to just look at the images and come to terms with the fact that they were not RWS, probably not even clones, and yet they are based on that system. They are just as effective. And forgive me for saying this, but because they are modern, I actually feel like my students will probably resonate more with them rather than the OG. because they're modern. And let's face it, my students are like, I mean, I have my youngest student now is 19 years old. So when I show the AWS, it's the equivalent of my reaction when I was looking at the Solabusca. You know, the Solabusca or the Visconti Sforza. I couldn't even see the symbols because they were not resonating. They were not. I struggled to resonate, to be reminded of something that I know on the image, from the images of that deck, because it's reflecting centuries ago images that we probably don't even see, if not in a history documentary. Does that make sense? So I'm going to show you these decks. I'm going to talk about them. And I want your honest opinion. As I said, I'm not discarding DOG. DOG is DOG. But are we moving on? That's my question. Is this a new generation of decks that now it feels like the Gen Z, and we're looking at them and we feel love for them and we want to protect them and we want to teach them wisdom, but we also know that wisdom will come eventually with experience. And then we know that one day they will be the ones leading the world, you know, just the new lawyers, the new doctors, the new CEOs, the new startup founders, and so on and so forth. So do we look at these decks the same way we look at our Gen Z? My nieces are Gen Z. And so I don't know. I'm really curious to hear your opinion. Okay, so it started with this. Okay, this is the cosmic cycles. Let me just zoom in all the way. Probably not all the way, but enough. The cosmic cycles tarot. So this is a indie deck that is still indie. I believe it's still available. There's a couple of versions. One of them has some really, really cool purple edges. It's by Martina Raza and Miriam E.G. It's a group of, so this is a team, a Spanish team. I believe that it's still available and it's around 65 euros, but I'm not entirely sure. And then you always have to add shipping. So, you know, do your own research. But honestly, no, maybe it's less than 65 euros because I think I paid $65. So it must be less than that. In any case, honestly, it costs less than some of the most recent mass market tarot decks that I've seen out there. So yes, it is an indie deck. But you may actually consider it if you want. If you like it, if you want to buy it, you may consider it because, as I said, really nowadays, the differences in prices, they're just getting closer and closer and closer. And honestly, I feel that what we can call a mass market deck should not cost more than an indie deck. And mass market is not just about the level of distribution, because on top of everything, we talked about it many times before, there is not the same level of distribution worldwide that used to be the case 15 years ago. So I don't know that okay, of course the mass market ones are published by mass market publishers, but those few characteristics that you ascribe to a deck being mass market, they're just failing. In any case, that's a different video probably. So this is the story of the Page of Wands. And she's clearly going through a lot. She's clearly in a time of her life that things are changing. They're changing very quickly. And she has to adapt to these changes. And all of these cards reflect her friends, her life, moments of her life. And something that has been very important to her formation, to her maturity, to her coming of age story. So it is a deck that I resisted buying for a while because I honestly thought that it was depicting Gen Z. It's a generation that I honestly, as I said, they could be my kids, my nieces are Gen Z. The kids of my closest friends are Gen Z. Ironically, apart from my own generation, I'm more familiar with Gen Z than any other generation because I don't know, as the adults in the situation, we feel like we're responsible. I honestly, even when I go around with my friends and their kids, I'm literally overreacting. Probably because my friends have had 2-3 kids and now they're like, let them do whatever they want. But I don't have children, so in my case, it's like, oh my God, it's gonna cross the street. Can it cross the street? Can it cross? I literally went like this with the son of a friend of mine. It was back in 2019, and he was 5. And she went, yeah, I can cross the street. So I was like, sorry, I just didn't know if I should have, just run ahead. So when you don't have children, you overreact to your friends' children, and you're like, oh, so it's okay for them to cross the street now. Okay, fine. Now I will just remember the next time I see them crossing the street, I will let them cross the street. So I just wanted to point out a few of these cards. These are very powerful. I believe that the Cosmic Cycles was one of the very first one to just come up with an RWS deck that was not even remotely pointing to the symbols and the images that we see on the RWS. And yet, because there's many decks that do that, but yet this is not just incredibly successful and resonating with a lot of people because it is modern and we immediately make a connection. That's what I wanted to say, because there's other decks that do that. And just to talk about one, for example, the Tarot V, the Tarot Vampire, so Tarot V by Alejandro Colucci, which is right here, and I keep it on my desk because I'm doing this multi-deck study with my members, and we're studying vampire-themed decks, and this is one of them. I have 9 decks that we're using. So in this case, this one is also not showing you pretty much any elements that you can immediately connect and you can immediately ascribe as the RWS. But I personally don't think that is as successful as other decks like the Cosmic Cycle and others that I will show you later, in evoking exactly the same kind of feelings, emotions, and ideas and meanings. It's beautiful, it's haunting, it's haunted, but it's not easy to read. I would never tell, for example, one of my students to base their studies on the Tarot V or the Tarot Z or others like that. I would say, if you like it, by all means, buy it, because it's freaking gorgeous and it's really one of those decks that I just absolutely adore because I do love the genre. But this is not a beginner's deck. You will have to go back and forth between the guidebook, and I'm not entirely sure that the guidebook is actually giving you enough of a connection to the RWS. And so if you don't already know all of the meanings of all of the RWS cards, upright and reversed, well, I don't think it's very easy to use this deck. So what I mean is that the Cosmic Cycles, I have absolutely no problems in giving it to a beginner and tell them, look, I would prefer you to study the OG RWS, but if it doesn't resonate with you, and I get it, because you're 19 years old and looking at the images of the OG RWS, it's just, you probably have to memorize the symbols, but to you, those symbols, they're just notions, they're notions. It doesn't resonate for you. It doesn't feel like you can ascribe it to an experience that you yourself have had. Does that make sense? When maybe 50 years ago it was still the case, I don't think that my niece has ever seen, unless it was in a museum or for a particular kind of settings or events, but there are no wooden chariots around anymore. And honestly, probably not even when I was little. So looking at the wooden chariot, of course we know what it is. But, okay, let me just give you another example. It's not on the OG, but have you ever tried showing a rotary phone, one of those phones that you have to put your index finger on one of the small holes and then go all the way down to the number you wanted to dial? And it took forever, especially if it was a phone number that had all 8s and 9s and 0s. Have you ever shown one of those phones to a 15-year-old? They don't know how to use it. They think that they have to press the button, but then nothing happens. So what I mean with that is the OG become the rotary phone of 2025, 2026, or Gen Z? And so does it make more sense to teach our students to read with these decks? Still teaching the RWS, but with these decks or not? Sorry, it took me a while to get to the point, but sometimes it's like that. I mean, for me, I know that I have a question in mind. My mind is far quicker than my words, and I just have to understand how to formulate the question before I actually ask it. But I think that's it. Should we? Is the OG the rotary phone of Gen Z? And that's a good question, I think. So in this case, if this is a divorce, this is so recognizable, and unfortunately, it does resonate for a lot of people. Well, for example, I don't know in your country, but in Italy, we only introduced divorce in the 70s. So obviously, when you show a card like this, and obviously before that, it wasn't legal. I'm not saying people were not separating, they were. But that was actually kind of criminal, so you couldn't just up and leave. So I was thinking, because after the 70s, there was a boom of divorces. Imagine all of the couples that wanted to divorce in the early 70s that finally could. I believe it was 1974. If they finally could, and obviously they all went to the lawyer and they started the proceedings. So obviously this card would have been very relatable back then, and there's obviously many divorces now as well, and people get married more than once. It's not a stigma anymore. It's not frowned upon anymore. It's just something that happens in life, and that's it. You move on, you find someone else. But this is very relatable. It wouldn't have been relatable back then, but now it is. Is it relatable to be, for the Two of Swords, your original image, to see a person blindfolded? That's already creepy. Do you really go around and think that sooner or later you see someone blindfolded? No, I don't, unless it's a fair or something like that, unless it's a piñata, unless it's someone, playing a game. Otherwise, it would be just creepy. And add Two Swords put this way, I honestly would call the police. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that back in the 50s, it would still have been an image that would have been quite common as a sight. But back in the 1900s, probably yes. So this is clearly pointing to a divorce. Mom on the one side, dad on the other side. I don't know if you can see. And it's a choice. It's a choice. Who do I go with? Who do I follow? Who do I listen to? Who do I stay with? And it's heartbreaking. And this to someone who's 15, 16, 19-year-old, this they will remember. When they pull the Two of Swords, even with a different deck, this is what they will remember. The pain of choosing, of not knowing, of having to choose and not wanting to, of not even knowing what's going to happen because she's too little. She doesn't know what it means for your mom and dad to split up. She doesn't know what the future will look like. The only thing that she knows is that she is required to make a choice that is breaking her heart no matter what she chooses. And that is a great way to show the Two of Swords. It's a great way to show the Two of Swords. And I can guarantee that if I teach a 15-year-old how to read tarot with this card, the next time they pull the Two of Swords, they will know how to talk about the Two of Swords. And again, guys, you could be disagreeing with me, I could be completely wrong, but I've been teaching for decades, and I really struggle. I not struggle to teach, but my students really struggle. And maybe that's because I don't believe in using the OG anymore. Because if I talk about a chariot, they look at me like that. Honestly, showing a naked baby on a horse, they look at me like that. And I get it. Come on, I get it. I mean, really? How creepy is that? A naked kid, a naked child riding a horse. How creepy is that? And all the nudity, I'm sorry to say this, But unfortunately, this world, that is a world that is probably dominated by algorithms in all the social media platforms that Gen Z is currently basing their lives on. Those algorithms are teaching Gen Z that nudity is wrong, without making a distinction between nudity as art and nudity as exploitative nudity, which is a problem. Because in many countries, for example, they're discussing whether to cover the offensive bits of statues with veils, for example. Yes, I've seen it happening, I kid you not. And obviously, that sends a message, that does send a message out. So if I'm thinking about the Marielle tarot, which has been flagged in, at least that I know of, 2 tarot tubers channels, the Marielle has been flagged. It feels like it's teaching that I don't know who they are, but the algorithms do not even want to learn the difference between artistic nudity and exploitative nudity. And so, do we really expect a 15-year-old not to freak out when they see a naked child riding a horse? Of course they will. Honestly, I would be worried if they don't freak out, if they find that normal. Even I don't find that normal. It's just that I've been studying and reading with the RWS for decades, and now it's like, it's a naked kid on a horse again. So now I'm going to show you the other decks. That was the first one because I believe that it was also chronologically the first one that was, let's say, very modern, in a very modern take, but at the same time not necessarily symbolical. Because, for example, the Light Seers is also very modern, but you wouldn't believe the amount of symbols that there are on the cards. I did the deck study with my members. I had a headache every time because there were so many symbols. It's chock full of symbols. And what I'm talking about here, these are not decks. These are modern decks that show you they don't show you symbols. I don't know how else to explain that. They show you stuff that happens in life. And yet they become symbolic, of course they do, but they don't show you runes, they don't show you sacred geometry, they don't show you numerology, they don't show you mandalas, and so on and so forth, which are things that you can actually see in the Light Seer in every corner of the cards. So I'm not going into any specific kind of order now, I just have them by my side and I wanted to show them to you. So moving on. The Cozy Witch Tarot deck, another deck that I really hesitated buying. Why? Because all of the characters here are very young. And as I always say, at this point, they could very well be, not my children because I don't have any, but they could very well be my nieces. And so I just thought to myself, it's not going to speak to me because I am not this young. There's only a couple of examples of, let's say, older people. But guess what? This deck is amazing. I finally got it because it was discounted for, I believe, Black Friday a couple of years ago. And I believe I didn't spend more than 15 Australian dollars for it. So I was like, it's the price. Actually, it's a lot less. It's a quarter pizza. It's the price of a quarter pizza in Sydney. So, I make pizza myself. So I thought, okay, there you go. So you do have one more, let's say, adult-looking person, but 99% of these characters here, apart from this one, obviously, they look like they're in their early 20s, even teenagers sometimes. And it's totally fine because guess what? As I said, this deck is amazing. It totally works. It totally works. And what I like about this is that, let's put it this way, it is still very successful deck. It does convey the sense of the RWS. If you give it to a beginner, they will work and read their way through this deck, and they will also remember it the next time they use it. They will remember how to read it because it's the images and not the symbols that convey the message. And so I like it. I like it very much. It's a thematic deck. It's about a cozy witch, obviously. It's the name, the title of the deck. So it's there's still symbols here, obviously, because I believe that whenever you stay with the theme, you kind of need to make some elements recurring. And when elements are recurring to express a concept, they become by default symbols. So obviously there are still symbols here. But these symbols at least, so for example in here, I like the fact that this is the Three of Swords, and it says it's okay to cry. And this is the image of a person that is walking down the steps out of a library. As you can see here, there's a couple of pigeons. She's holding a book to her chest, and this book, we don't know which book that is, but we see she's crying, and it's also raining. But we see the image of the OG Three of Swords. So it's very tiny, I don't know if you can see, but it's a pierced heart. It's a heart that's been pierced by 3 swords. So I like the idea that obviously that is symbolic. Well, there might be books that show this, obviously fantasy books, I'm thinking Quicksilver, something like that. But it's not the symbol that is so important in the OG, to the point that it's the only thing that you see on the Three of Swords in the OG. You just see that. Has become a memory, as it has become the idea of the feelings that the cards, that this card in specific is evoking in yourself. And so it's on the book, but it's not her heart that is pierced. It's very difficult as a concept to, let's say, to deliver, and I'm still working on it. But I think that when we see it this way, if I show this card to a 15-year-old, they will understand what the card means, that there is that sense of heartbreak, but at the same time, it's also on the mind. And it's more effective than certainly that a heart that has been pierced by 3 swords. I personally believe that. Having said that, it's also true that the Three of Swords is one of the least effective cards on. Well, however, it is effective because it tells you a story, but it's one of the least illustrated in the original RWS. Indecisive and witch. Wake up. What is it that you truly want? So this one obviously has some kind of a different take on these cards. I still really very much appreciate it. So moving on to another deck, but you will see that it's something common to all of these ones. So the Unveiled Tarot. This is probably the one that started this idea of mine, that we're moving on towards a Gen Z kind of decks, and I feel like we should definitely pay attention to this kind of evolution in tarot, because contrary to other things that happened in the last 4 decades, it feels like this one is actually here to stay, simply because it is showing you a world that will become more and more resonating with the new generations. And unfortunately, we have been on the cusp of changing things for the last 10-15 years, because you cannot propose as I said, probably any of the cards from the OG to someone who's young and wants to learn how to read tarot without them having to probably struggle to memorize the meaning of the cards, because they cannot really see it on the card itself. And so I believe that decks like this one and others that I've shown and I will show soon are the new generation of decks, because they do that. They do that in a very specific way. They do that in a very impactful way, because obviously you can't memorize something that is not impactful, that didn't have an impact on you. And they also do that, if I may say, they do that in a very clever way. This deck is incredibly clever. I've talked about this deck many times, and I know that many of you would have watched those videos. There's actually a walkthrough of this deck on my channel. And I never do walkthroughs because I just don't have time, to be honest. But look at this card. I mean, the mob, isn't it terrifying? And if you give this card, it's not even one of the 78 cards, right? This is not an arcana, major nor minor, nor court cards. It's the mob card. It's an additional card. But give this to a 15-year-old, they will immediately know what it means. They will immediately know how to talk about it. If they do a reading and they pull this card, they immediately know what it's referring to. They don't need to memorize anything. It just speaks for itself. It's the mob. And look at the expression of terror, pure terror on the eyes. I don't know if you can see, but it's not that tiny, so you can probably see it here on the face of this person. And look at the sense of complete annihilation of personalities on the faces of everyone else here, because they follow the sheeps, they follow the mob mentality. Don't speak for yourself, don't decide for yourself, just do what the others do. And if the others are enraged for something, you should be enraged for something as well. But the person in the frame here, they understand that is not really entirely the case, and sometimes you do need to stand against the flow. I just love this deck so much. It's probably, honestly, I haven't started teaching with these decks. I'm still using the RWS, but I'm so tempted. I'm so tempted to move on. And then I ask myself, am I doing my student a disservice, by showing them these decks and teaching tarot with these modern decks? What is going to happen if, because there's still a lot of tarot decks out there that are still pretty much RWS based and clones of RWS. So am I doing a disservice to my student to teach them how to read tarot with these decks instead of the RWS, so that when they do buy an RWS clone, they just don't recognize anything about the images? I don't think so. Maybe we should integrate the reading of the studying of these decks together with the OG. Maybe that's an idea. So the next one is a recent one that really blew me away, because I remember I was doing a tarot and oracle decks haul video. I love doing those, an unboxing video basically. And this one was the first deck, and I was thinking to myself, I'm just going to be quick about this deck. It was the spooky season. This one is not a spooky deck, and so I thought to myself, I'm just going to move on quickly to the other ones, and I couldn't. I just couldn't. This deck just literally caught my attention. It caught my heart. It's called the Manga Tarot because, I don't know if you can see it now, all of the cards basically are showing you what looks like a page out of a manga magazine, a manga. And if you are familiar with manga and anime, Japanese manga and animes, this one is basically what I call my pre-Sailor Moon style of a manga or anime, because they were all looking like this before Sailor Moon, and then Sailor Moon came, and after Sailor Moon all the characters look like Sailor Moon. The only differences is in the color of the clothes and the color of the hair and the eyes, but they all look exactly like Sailor Moon. I think you probably understand why I prefer the pre-Sailor Moon. It's just, I think there's a lot more diversity, but I don't necessarily see manga as having to show diversity. Manga is manga, and it does have its own dignity and its own reason to be. So I actually really enjoy any type of manga. Well, not any type, but I'm very selective and picky, but I do really enjoy mangas even nowadays. It's not something that I just did in my teens or whatever, or even when I was a child. I was watching anime on TV. So this deck is incredible. Again, not even remotely showing in the symbols of the OG, but still incredibly effective. It's so much so that it actually tells you a story. So ironically, this deck would probably be one of the decks that I would choose as a modern deck to teach my students, because it's telling you a story. And when you tell a story, rather than keywords from a tarot card, you choose one of those keywords. And I believe that we should give our students a as broad approach to tarot as possible, and then let them understand that out of those 5 keywords, for example, depending on all of the cards around, when you do a reading, depending on all of the cards around the card that you're reading, then you will be able to choose which keywords actually applicable to that specific reading. And I think that when you're when you're becoming a storyteller, in describing the card itself, you have chosen one keyword out of 5, 6, 10, 15. So maybe not this one. Maybe this one would be a deck for a more intermediate kind of level. It's still an amazing deck, and as I said, very effective. Like it's incredible how how powerful it is. So for example, this one is the 5 of Cups, is about sorrow. And obviously it tells a story. I believe it tells a story of a person who's retreating from society, from reality. They're just, they don't want to get out of bed. You can see them here, and they do have their phone nearby. They've been smoking. There are 5 missed calls, so you can tell that there's people actually trying to check in with this person, but they don't want to answer. They are going through a moment in which they don't want anyone around, and they don't even want to speak to anyone. And as you can see here, it's been going on for a while because you have leftovers from takeaway. You have a couple of cans of a drink of something. And so the word that is associated with this card here, because this deck does come with keywords as well, it's sorrow. So obviously you choose to tell one specific story out of the 5 or 6 stories you could talk about when looking at the 5 of Cups. And I'm completely on board with the sorrow related to the 5 of Cups. However, I also know that there are lighter stories that you can associate with the card. So this one, as I said, probably more of an intermediate level, but that is definitely one of the decks that convinced me that maybe we are being faced with a new generation of decks. So another deck that I just recently acquired, and again, I remember filming the first impression of Find Your Magic Tarot. I remember filming the first impression and thinking to myself, should I stop the video and just do let's say a walkthrough of this particular deck, because it really feels like one of those decks. It gave me the same, sorry, it's kind of stuck. It gave me the same chills that I got when I was unboxing the Unveil Tarot and the Manga Tarot. It literally gave me the chills. This is a deck that I haven't read with it yet. I have looked at the cards at least 3 times, and every time I would have to say though that this deck is it makes me happy on a whole different level, because it is actually challenging me a little bit, in the sense that I get probably 50-60% of the cards. I get them immediately, and by get them I mean that I get the association with the traditional RWS. I can see that immediately, even though, as I was saying about all of the other decks that I've been showing today, this is not even remotely showing you the images or not even the symbols related to the RWS. As you can see here, where is it? The Emperor. I love the Emperor because these cards, it just resonates so much with me, because I do have cats, only one unfortunately now, but it is black and white. It's a tuxedo, or cow cat, however you want to call it. I prefer tuxedo, it's more elegant, and my cat is elegant. And the patches of white hair that he's got, that is so painful, because I end up with all of my jumpers. There's a particular kind of fabric that really works like static glue to my cat's hair, especially the white one. And I always use this lint roll. Is it called lint roll? That you have to, it's sticky, and you have to basically brush yourself off of those hair. So it is a card that, I may struggle to refer to this figure as the Emperor, but then again, looking at it and looking at the fact that we're talking about someone who's very comfortable with cat, loved by cat, very comfortable also with them around them, and still nonchalant enough to just, remove all the hair from their suit. That denotes this sense of confidence and authority and charisma that it's projecting, and I definitely read the Emperor as someone like that. So I was reading out of the guidebook when it comes to the Wheel of Fortune and other cards as well, and it's true that some cards, it leaves you wanting more, in the sense that it leaves you, or it leaves me at least, maybe someone will connect immediately with these cards. Maybe if I do show it to my nieces, they will immediately understand the cards. For me, it just is possibly a 20%, a 15-20% of knowledge that I feel like I'm missing, and I need to probably build up on that, build up on what the guidebook is telling me, and then try and finish, get to the finish line with my own intuition. So that is actually quite cool. I think that when you start collecting and you're very young, like I was, and then you keep on collecting throughout your whole life, you get to the point that you want to be surprised. You want your mind to be challenged. You want also to be proved wrong sometimes. I don't want to be, for example, the Hierophant. In the principle of constellation of the Hierophant, when we look at the numerologies associated, and also the constellation of all of the number 5s out of the tarot deck, is something that I've done with my members when I was doing the Read Like a Pro, professional tarot reader course. I was talking about the constellation of the Hierophant. The Hierophant is supposed to constantly learn in order for their teachings not to become obsolete. And if you're a teacher, you would know. I have friends who are teachers, and they have to do a lot of courses throughout the year in order to learn new methodology of teaching, also learn new topics and new subjects, learn how to relate to their students. There's a number of things that teachers are not just teaching. They have to be learners as well. And I think it's a fantastic idea. It's a great concept, because otherwise you would just have an older person that has been teaching the same thing over and over again. And then, this is also my point here, if we are tarot teachers, and if we see teachers of any other, let's say, topic, if you teach science or geography, science especially, when you teach science, you're supposed to do a lot of let's say, courses in order to always be relevant, in order for your teachings never to become obsolete. Then why we as tarot teachers don't look at it the same way? Who's to say that we need to, just stay and teach the same things over and over again? I strongly believe that we need to evolve with times as well, just as any other teacher out there. But as I said, this is something that obviously I find this concept fascinating, and this is a question to you out there. What do you think? Are you a tarot teacher? Have you ever been teaching tarot? And even more so, are you a Gen Z? Okay, are you a 19-year-old, and are you learning tarot? What would you prefer? What would you prefer? Would you prefer to study from the original RWS with those symbols? Would you prefer to just focus perhaps on the Cosmic Cycles Tarot? Or would you prefer a little bit of both, learning the traditional symbology, but also seeing it in action, in scenes depicted on the cards that you can actually relate to? That's something that it would be fascinating for me if you would let me know. Because honestly, as a teacher, I feel like I have to be ready to, the most important thing for me is for my student to understand how to read. That's my role, that's my duty. I need to make sure that when they go out in the world and they want to give readings to people, I need to make sure that they know how to do it. Okay, last but not least, I'm showing you the I Am Not a Doll Tarot. This deck is also an indie deck. It's by the Stray Cat Studio. If you live in Southeast Asia, this is readily available also in retailers. But it's also, I don't know if this one in specific is still available. It might actually be out of print because I checked the Tevada shop and the Vermilion shop and another couple of shops that sell decks from creators from Southeast Asia, and I couldn't find this one any longer. So maybe it's not available anymore. Apologies for that. This is a fantastic deck. I bought it at the Tokyo Taro Museum, and all of the decks are for sale. So basically when you go there, you can acquire all of the decks that are showing there. Sorry, this must be the certificate of, yes, it's the certificate of authenticity, obviously. So this one is a deck that I would say it's probably a little bit more difficult for me to understand. Ironically, this is the closest one that we've seen so far today to the OG RWS. But at the same time, the theme that is common in all of these cards is the presence of a dummy. So a dummy as in the mannequin, from a shop, for example. And indeed, the title of the deck is I Am Not a Doll. And so what I believe this deck is doing right, even though we do see the symbols related to the RWS, the original one. So technically, it's not necessarily one of those decks that are called the new generation of decks. But it's tackling the thematics out of these cards with under a new perspective. So this deck is defiant. And I say this after having been working with this deck for months already. So I've acquired it in June, and I've been working ever since with this deck. I have been, at the beginning, I've been kind of confronting myself with this idea. What did it mean for me? The fact that I was so taken. So this deck made me very emotional because probably not necessarily, you won't see it just necessarily from the cards, I don't think, but the concept of this deck, apart from the fact that it's absolutely gorgeous, some of these cards are really gorgeous, but the concept of this deck made me emotional. It made me emotional because it reminded me of a very specific time in my life in which I was very miserable. I was young. I was very miserable. I felt like I was in prison. Very Eight of Swords situation. I did not know how to get out. I felt like I was also contributing to that prison, to being locked up. And the prison was basically my family, basically everything that was happening in my family. You grow up in a family with a lot of issues and you kind of get by. There's a lot of people that have to do that. I am by no means the only one. But I had come to a point in which I was rebelling against the idea that that was my life. And I just didn't know how to get out of that. And I didn't know whether it was okay to get out of that. And as a matter of fact, I even hated myself and berated myself by wanting to get out of that because I was telling myself, you're not a good person. I'm a bad person. I'm a bad person because I don't want to be in this situation anymore. And it's your family and you're like, no, I'm a bad person because I'm supposed to want to be around all this pain, this misery, these mental illness and physical illness. And obviously there was this idea that you should behave, you're a good girl, you should behave. So not being a doll, but this deck for me was still representing a moment in which I thought to myself, do I really care about being a good girl? If being a good girl means that I have to be absolutely miserable, then let me be a bad girl. And I think that the moment in which I understood that it was okay for me to feel like I wanted to get out of that cage, I also understood that it didn't necessarily mean for me that I had to move on to the other side of the street and saying that I was a bad person. I just was a good person that wanted to be a good person in a different environment. So obviously it's a lot more complicated than that. But the title of this deck and also the vibes of this deck saying I am not a doll. So I am not a good girl. A good person, rather, a good girl. Good girl sounds really trivial. But I was literally telling myself I'm not a good person and I'm okay with not being a good person. So be it. But I don't want to be miserable. I might be a bad person. I don't know yet, but sure as hell, I'm not miserable. That's what I wanted to become, basically. What I wanted to evolve. That was the direction I wanted to take. And so this deck is exceptional for that, because I believe that if you went through something similar, this is the deck for you. The vibes of this deck are exactly the same. You feel like you're treated like a doll in a certain way, that you're supposed to be okay with being treated like that because society wants you to be treated like that and for you to be okay with that, and you don't want to. And you think that you're a bad person just because you don't want to conform to that. So that was it for today, guys. I did ask several questions that I really want your answers on. So please let me know in the comments below what you believe in, what you think. And as I said, especially if you're a tarot teacher and especially if you're a Gen Z, but let's say I didn't mean to make a distinction by being ageist, of course. It's not that. It's just that it was probably the easiest way to explain what I feel like when I look at these decks. In any case, thank you so much for watching and I will see you very soon. Bye!